Thank you very much for the introduction, and thank you so much for coming. It is a great honor to present a paper here at Shangri-La, and I'd like to express my deepest gratitude to Ms. Deborah Pope, Ms. Carol Kuhak, Ms. Ann Svensson, and Mr. Kent Severson, Ms. Dawn Swelka, and Ms. Bethany Bannister Andrews, and other staff members who kindly supported my stay and research here at Shangri-La. Thank you very much. Doris Duke's residence, Shangri-La, has a room in the Mughal style. This is a product of her honeymoon tour of 1935 when she was 23. One of the many countries she visited during her travels in the Middle East and Asia was India. She was said to have had a particular fondness for India. Her husband, James Cromwell, wrote that Doris Duke, quote, had fallen in love with the Taj Mahal and all the beautiful marble tiles with their lovely floral designs with some precious stones. End quote. Her taste for Mughal art led her to commission a marble bedroom and bathroom in the style of Mughal India. Doris Duke's bathroom reflects her understanding and passion for Mughal art. The screen of marble pierced work in the room imitates a similar marble pierced screen known as Jali at the Taj Mahal. Also, similar to the surface decoration of the Taj Mahal, the surface of the bathroom is embellished using the Pietro Dura or inlay technique using cut and polished color stones. Most probably, as a result of her interest in Mughal art, the collection at Shangri-La also contains high-quality Indian carpets and textiles. In this presentation, based on my research on Indian carpets and textiles held by the Doris Duke Foundation, I will focus on 2 Indian carpets and 3 Indian textiles of the 17th to 19th century and describes how and in what circumstances they were produced in India, circulated globally, and used in different contexts in different societies. A pair of large-shaped Indian carpets owned by the Doris Duke Foundation are examples of one of the famous types of North Indian carpets of the 17th century. The field is filled with patterns of flowering plants arranged in rows. It has 156 knots per square inch and is good enough to depict flowers in detail. This pair of carpets is assumed to have been used in the Jaipur Palace, which was built in 1592 by Raja Man Singh in North India. In 1875 and later, carpets in the Rajput court of the Jaipur Palace were transferred to the Jaipur Palace. As is apparent from more than 200 photographs of carpets in the Jaipur Palace, which were taken by Mr. Campbell, an employee of the Victoria and Albert Museum in 1929, this collection used to contain a variety of carpets, and among them are 16 shaped carpets. While we don't know the exact timing, some of them left India before or after Campbell's investigation in 1929 and passed into the ownership of private European and American collectors and museum collections. For instance, the Museum of Fine Arts Boston has a similar shaped carpet. The Textile Museum in DC and Cincinnati Art Museum own different types of shaped carpets. Gulbenkian Museum in Lisbon has a rectangular carpet of the same type. However, as a shaped carpet in Albert Hall Museum in Jaipur testifies, some carpets of this type still do remain in India. The pair of shaped carpets owned by the Doris Duke Foundation used to be in Jaipur. Owing to previous research by Keelan Overton, its provenance has been tracked and verified. According to previous studies, one of them must have left India before Campbell's research because it was published in 1922 as belonging to the collection of Mr. Leonil Harris, an owner of the Spanish Art Gallery in London. Sometime during 1931 to 1940, the pair was owned by Hagop Kevorkian, a famous dealer in New York. In 1941, in order to sell this pair of the carpets, he wrote a letter to Doris Duke, emphasizing their quality and the prestigious provenance. However, she did not purchase the carpets from him. Over 2 decades later, in 1966 to 67, the Kevorkian Foundation organized a traveling exhibition of 41 carpets from Hagop Kevorkian's collection, which included the pair of shaped carpets now in Shangri-La and a famous large 17th to 18th century carpet from South India, now in the Museum of Islamic Art in Doha, Qatar. This exhibition, which traveled to prominent cities in the US, played a pivotal role in drawing people's attention to carpets from Islamic lands. However, before this pair became part of the Doris Duke's collection, they were auctioned at Sotheby's London in 1969 and purchased by J. Paul Getty and preserved in the storage of the Getty Museum until 1990, when the pair was auctioned again at Sotheby's, New York. Finally, at the age of 78, Doris Duke purchased this pair. The acquisition of these shaped carpets shows that her passion for Islamic art was a lifelong one, and it continued until her death 3 years later. Unfortunately, this pair of carpets was put in storage and never brought to Shangri-La in her lifetime. However, this pair of shaped carpets, which are now in Shangri-La, is very important because it is the only known pair of this type, and they were both in very good condition. The pair of shaped carpets in Shangri-La is part of the group of shaped Mughal carpets that are generally attributed to the mid-17th century during the reign of Shah Jahan. And they were believed to have come from North India, probably from Lahore or Kashmir. The arrangement of several kinds of flowers can be found in the marble decoration of the Taj Mahal, which was built by Shah Jahan and completed in 1653. This pattern was very popular at that time, and the border design of a contemporary album commissioned by Shah Jahan also employs a similar flower pattern. The motif of the flowering plants was taken from engravings in European herbals, such as John Gerard's General History of Plants, published in 1597. As Elaine Wright points out, as early as 1616, following these European herbals, a Mughal artist, Mansur, produced various botanical illustrations. Thus, the design of this flower pattern on the shaped carpets in Shangri-La confirms to the pictorial tradition of the mid-17th century. While the original function of these shaped carpet is still unknown, Daniel Walker and others suggest that they were used to decorate the floor around the throne. If this is the case, a pair of shaped carpets could have been spread around a hexagonal throne or a pedestal. This Mughal painting depicts an example of a hexagonal pedestal on which princes are sitting. From his throne, an emperor or a noble could enjoy a variety of flowers that would have been oriented in such a way as to have been best viewed by the sitter. On the other hand, in her 1984 article, Yaduvendra Sahai, a keeper of the Jaipur City Palace Museum at the time, suggests that these shaped carpets were designed for the veranda of tents. According to Sahai, it had been common in Jaipur to put up tents in the royal grounds for guests, and these large tents would have had verandas as well as covered passageways running between them. In both cases, such shaped carpets would have been appropriate as floor coverings for royalty because the intense red color with a variety of flowers could vividly beautify a palace made out of white marble or sandstone, materials that were often used for palaces in India. Moreover, as the illustration of Padishahnama produced in the mid-17th century shows, along with a variety of textiles such as embroidery and painted textiles, carpets were essential for furnishing at the Mughal court. I would now like to briefly explain when and in what circumstances carpets first started to be woven in India. The production of pile carpets in North India was recorded as early as the late 10th century. In 985-86, reporting on the commercial products of Sindh, that is the eastern part of the Indian subcontinent and modern Pakistan, the Arab geographer Muqaddasi mentions that, quote, in all the provinces, carpets, busut, and the like of the kind made in Kuhistan and Khorasan are manufactured, end quote. The Arabic word busut usually refers to a knotted pile carpet. Kuhistan is located in the area of Pakistan's northwest frontier, and Khorasan is part of modern Iran and Afghanistan. According to Stephen Cohen, Muqaddasi's statement is confirmed by other contemporary Arab and Persian authors. While Muslim merchants came to India and engaged in trade between India and Central and Western Asia, and they might have transported carpet to India, it is also highly probable that the Muslim invasion of North India may have led to the frequent use and production of pile carpets, because carpet was a necessary court furnishing and was also often used for prayers. From around the beginning of the 11th century, Mahmud of Ghazna is said to have conducted raids into India on 17 occasions. Then, in the late 12th century, the Ghurids invaded and occupied North India. Subsequently, Qutb ad-Din Aibak founded the Delhi Sultanate that ruled North India from 1206 until the beginning of the Mughal Empire in 1526. One of the Delhi Sultanates was the Lodi dynasty, which ruled Delhi from 1451 to 1526 and directly preceded the Mughal dynasty. In 1517, On the occasion of the coronation of Sultan Ibrahim Lodi at Delhi, people prepared, quote, the tents embroidered with gold and adorned with jewels, and spread carpets of various colors worked with gold thread, end quote. While the type of carpet is unknown from these records, given the fact that pile carpets were already used under preceding dynasties, some of these carpets were probably pile carpets. The use of carpet at the time is also indicated by manuscript paintings. The Malwa Sultanate was an independent kingdom in northwest India from 1392 to 1562. Many illustrated manuscripts were made at the Malwa court. Among them is the illustrated manuscript of Nimatnama, or Book of Delights of Giyas Shahi, datable to 1495 to 1505. In the illustration of Giyas Shah feasting, he is sitting on a carpet with a pseudo-Kufic border. So this is the pseudo-Kufic border. Kufi is the type of script, and this is imitation of Kufic script. This type of carpet with pseudo-Kufic border can be found in this kind of mid-15th century Persian paintings. So this type of depiction of carpet with imitation of Kufic script often appears in the mid-15th century Persian painting as well. Another Malwa painting depicts man sitting on a carpet with a Kufesque border, that type of pseudo-Kufic border. The style of clothing, interior, and tableware shows close affinity with a contemporary Persian painting, probably from Herat, this one, and dating to around 1490, which depicts a carpet with a similar border. Thus, from the written record and illustrated paintings, it seems probable that in the late 15th to early 16th century, pile carpets with Kufesque borders in imitation of Persian carpets were locally made and used in the courts of Indian sultanates. The production of pile carpets was highly developed in the Mughal dynasty, which ruled from 1526. It is commonly agreed that in the Mughal India, the high point of artistic creativity was during the reign of Akbar, Jahangir, and Shah Jahan, which spans from the mid-16th century to the mid-17th century. Around 1590, Abul Fazl, who served Akbar, wrote a history of Akbar's reign, the Aini Akbari, in which he describes carpet production at the time. And I quote, "His Majesty has caused carpets, gilim, to be made of wonderful varieties and charming textures. He has appointed experienced workmen who have produced many masterpieces. The carpets, gilim, of Iran and Turan are no more thought of, although merchants still import carpets from Goshkan, Khuzestan, Kirman, and Sabzwar. All kinds of carpet weavers, Kalibaft, have settled here and drive a flourishing trade. These are found in every town, especially in Agra, Fatehpur, and Lahore." These are the towns Lahore, Agra, and Fatehpur. Thus, it is recorded that around the mid-16th century, during the reign of Akbar, Indian carpets were woven in several places, especially in the imperial capitals of Agra, Fatehpur Sikri, and Lahore. And these carpets were of a sufficient quality to compare favorably to Persian and Central Asian carpets. So-called pictorial carpets, such as this one in Vienna, attributed to Lahore, represent a major accomplishment in Indian carpet weaving during the reign of Akbar. Its extremely dense weave, about 460 knots per square inch, enabled the weaver to create naturalistically depicted trees and various kinds of birds in the field. The fine drawing and subtle color tones make this carpet look like a picture. In the first half of the 17th century, finely woven pashmina carpets were also produced. Pashmina is fine wool made from the undercoat of Himalayan mountain goats. Carpets with pashmina pile on a silk foundation were the most luxurious carpets produced in India. Some examples produced under Shah Jahan are said to be the most finely woven carpet in the history of carpets. Such are the circumstances in which the group of shaped carpets were produced. However, technical analysis of the pair of carpets at Shangri-La indicates that they were not as finely woven as pashmina carpets. The pile is wool instead of pashmina. Regarding the material for the weft, in pashmina carpets, all the shoots are usually silk, whereas as the image on the left, this one indicates, the weft of shaped carpets typically consists of undyed cotton for the first and the third shoot and red silk for the second shoot. This is the typical structure of the group of the shaped carpets. However, as Annie Svensson points out, in some areas, weft is all cotton, this one. Thus, in the image on the right here, you don't see any red silk. In this way, carpet weavers often substituted undyed cotton for silk for the second shoot, which means that in the case of the pair of carpet in Shangri-La, the weavers paid less attention to the material and consistency, and they are not as high quality as those made for the Mughal court. These shaped carpets were probably made in the 17th century somewhere in North India, such as Lahore, and according to inventory labels attached to carpets in Jaipur, they were purchased by Mirza Raja Jai Singh of Ambel in the mid to late 17th century to fit the palace at Ambel, which was built in 1592. This circular carpet, currently in the Albert Hall Museum in Jaipur, is also recorded to have been acquired for the Ambel Palace by him in 1655. From the beginning of the 17th century, high-quality carpets produced in North India attracted Europeans as well. When the English and Dutch East India companies were established at the beginning of the 17th century, Indian carpets were exported as trade goods. Most famous among such carpets is the so-called girdler's carpet. The Girdlers Company in London originally made elaborate belts used in ceremonial costumes. At the beginning of the 17th century, the director of the company, Robert Bell, commissioned the carpet through the English East India Company, and this carpet is documented to have been woven in Lahore in 1630 to 1632. Since this carpet was used as a table cover by the company, it has ink stains, but aside from that, it appears to be virtually brand new. Also, in the 17th century, some Indian carpets woven in North India, such as this one, were brought to Japan by the Dutch East India Company as diplomatic gift for the shogun. Doris Duke's collection of Indian textiles includes not only carpets, but also painted textiles and embroideries. Among them is a hand-painted tent panel made in South India in the 17th century. It shows a flowering plant at the center and tiny Chinese cloud motif around it. The Metropolitan Museum of Art has a very similar tent panel, which was once in the Untitled Palace. They look very similar, and most probably, these panels were originally sewn together to form a larger tent panel, like this 17th century tent panel produced in South India. As this painting indicates, tent panels were sewn together to make a long screen to surround royal encampments. In the Mughal court, a special department known as Farashkhana took care of the storage of textiles and carpets because these items and the way in which they were arranged were an indispensable part of the court setting and created an ambience for a variety of occasions, irrespective of whether the court was held in a building or outside. This is also the case for other royal courts in India. While these 17th century painted tent panels for courts were made in South India in a region known as the Deccan, later, in the 18th century, other types of painted textiles, known as chintz, were produced in the Deccan for the European market. In terms of design, a unique embroidery currently in the living room of Shangri-La, which was probably produced in the late 19th to early 20th century in India, is a remnant of this type of painted textiles that was produced in the 18th century on the Coromandel coast in the South India, especially for the Western market. And this painted textile is one such example. Both of them show a flowering tree growing from a hill at the center and vases filled with flowers are set at the bottom. The motifs of flowers are also related. Painted textiles such as these were exported to Europe and used as wall hangings or bed covers. Elements of the pattern, such as vases with flowers, follow European engravings to suit the taste of the Western users. Such as this one. So these engravings are from Europe, and Indian imitate the design from the European engravings. On the other hand, the motif on the flowering tree occurs often in the Indo-Persian tradition and appears in this mid-15th century illustration of Shahnama attributed to India. This type of flowering tree design was applied not only to the painted textiles, but also to the embroideries intended for the European market. This textile in the Metropolitan Museum of Art, this one, and another in the Royal Ontario Museum, are examples of such embroideries. This type of embroidery with flowering tree design was eventually brought to Japan in the 18th century by the Dutch East India Company, and such textiles were made into covers for the festival floats of the Kyoto Gion Festival. According to the inventory records preserved in the town, which still owns it, this piece was purchased by Kyoto merchants in 1774 and was then cut in half so that they could cover a float used for the Gion Festival. In the same year, 1,000 people were hired to embroider the undyed cotton background of the piece with gold thread, and it was finished in 1775. The piece is still used as a cover for a float in the annual Gion Festival. Shangri-La has several Indian embroideries, and among them is this medallion design embroidery. According to Anne Svensson, Doris Duke probably used this embroidery as a table cover as, here, a spill of wine has caused several areas of damage. It is embroidered with silk thread and metal wrapped thread in satin stitch. Quadrant is set at each corner. This embroidery is currently attributed to 18th century North India, but I would suggest it has a Deccani South Indian origin. Indian embroidery is famous for its quality, and even today, people still wear clothes that are beautifully decorated with embroidery. An early 17th century riding coat in the Victoria and Albert Museum exemplifies the superior quality of Indian embroidery. The design of animal hunting scenes with varieties of flowers and plants is minutely rendered in fine chain stitch, which is associated with the craftsmen in Gujarat in West India. Indian embroidery was applied to flower spreads as well. An embroidered flower spreads was often spread out on a carpet, as this early 17th century Mughal painting shows. So usually, these embroideries are spread on carpet. This embroidered flower spread with chain stitch was made around 1700 in North India. Such embroidered flower spreads were used not only in the court of the Mughal Empire, but also by local personages. Embroidered flower spreads were also made in South India, the Deccan. This embroidery at the Victoria and Albert Museum is said to have belonged to the Tipu Sultan of Mysore, who was the ruler of the kingdom of Mysore in the Deccan from 1782 until his death in 1799. In contrast to the above-mentioned embroideries from North India, which use chain stitch, this medallion design embroidery is executed with satin stitch with silk thread. The Victoria and Albert Museum has another medallion design embroidery that employs the same material and technique. My research has focused on this type of medallion design embroidery, and I discussed that these embroideries are probably from the Deccan, South India. While I cannot cover the background in detail in this paper, among this group are a medallion design embroidery in the Museum of Fine Arts, Boston, and a red ground medallion design embroidery in the Museo Nacional de Arte Antigua, Lisbon. At first glance, the embroidered flower spread at Shangri-La and these medallion design embroideries from the Deccan look different. But all of them use satin stitch with silk thread and metal wrapped thread on cotton ground, and some of the flower motifs are similar. The arrangement of the medallion in the center and the quadrant at each corner is also the same. Thus, while this embroidery is currently attributed to 18th century North India, I would like to suggest that its provenance is Deccan. Lastly, I would like to discuss the provenance of this carpet in Shangri-La. While this large medallion carpet is also currently attributed to 18th century North India, in terms of design, technique, and material, this carpet is different from the carpets that are commonly attributed to North India. First of all, this carpet is much coarser than the examples of 17th century North Indian carpets discussed in the first part of this paper. And also, unlike groups of pashmina pile North Indian carpets woven in the 18th century, this carpet in Shangri-La uses wool for both pile and weft. So usually Indian carpets often use cotton for weft, but here wool is used as weft. It looks like a finely woven carpet, but the weavers did not pay enough attention to details and sometimes omit minor motifs. For instance, here he forgot to put this motif, and where else? Here too. So there seems to be no definitive reason to attribute this carpet to 18th century North India. Rather, I'd like to suggest that it has a South Indian provenance instead. To support my view, in the following, I will explain the background of carpet production in South India, the Deccan. From the mid-14th century, the Hindu Vijayanagar here and the Muslim Bahmanids here ruled the Deccan, South India. So I use South India as I use the term Deccan to indicate this area. At the end of the 15th century, the Bahmanid domain split into 5 kingdoms: Golconda, Bijapur, Berar, Bidal, and Ahmadnagar. The Deccani sultans maintained diplomatic ties with the Mughals in the north. And they maintained close relations with Safavid Persia, Iran as well. In the last quarter of the 16th century especially, the Deccan experienced an influx of Persian immigrants who served as an elite in Bijapur and Golconda. The kingdom of Bijapur had flourishing cotton and silk weaving industries. In 1612, John Jaldan, who served the English East India Company, wrote in his journal that Bijapur produced all kinds of fine textiles. A Bijapur painting at the time depicts a prince and his beloved sitting on a carpet. Use of carpet in Bijapur is also mentioned in other sources. According to Abbe Carré, who traveled from France to India in the 1670s, on his way from Goa to Bijapur, he was entertained by the local governor and asked to sit on, quote, large Persian carpets with which all the room was covered, end quote. By this time, pile carpets must have been woven locally, and this term, quote, large Persian carpets, end quote, probably means Persian-style carpet woven in the Deccan. In fact, as Franz Sinderman and Stephen Cohen has revealed, the Asal Mahal in Bijapur holds several Persian carpets and a Deccani carpet of the 17th century. Carpet was also produced and used in the kingdom of Golconda. While Golconda is famous for painted textiles, such as this one, carpets were also used. According to Jean-Baptiste Tavernier, on the day of a festival, the tombs of the kings of Golconda were covered with rich carpets. Another French traveler, Jean de Thévenot, who went to India in 1666 to 67, also mentioned that on the occasion of the festival of Hussain in Golconda, people adorned the floors with carpets. These were probably locally woven pile carpets because several areas such as Erol and Warangal and Machilipatnam on the Coromandel coast. So this is Coromandel coast, are known to have produced pile carpets. Indeed, Erol here was a center of carpet production for many centuries. In 1679, Strasham Master, the chief representative of the English East India Company in the Bay of Bengal from 1676 to 1681, recorded in his diary that descendants of Persians were weaving Persian-style high-quality carpets with cotton warp and wool pile in Erol. Furthermore, it is implied by Strasham Master that Persians with knowledge of carpet weaving had come to Erol in the mid-16th century and had engaged in Persian-style carpet weaving since then. This record is substantiated by the design of Deccani carpet in Kyoto, this one, which is based on a typical 17th century Persian carpet design of scrolling serrated leaf, such as this one in Corcoran Gallery of Art in Washington, D.C. The Dutch and the English seem to have realized the potential of Deccani carpet as a commodity from the mid-17th century. The English and the Dutch East India companies set up factories on the Coromandel coast, this area. This is the detail of this area. So they have many factories on this Coromandel coast. During the 17th century and later, and engaged in textile trade. So they could easily commission and export carpets woven in carpet production centers in the Deccan. In fact, Machilipatnam, Erol, and Warangal, or these towns near the Coromandel coast in the Deccan, were famous for both textiles and carpet production, and they are in close proximity to each other. In 1681, the English East India Company requested that 100 Persian-style carpets made in Erol be sent to London as samples. Unfortunately, we cannot confirm whether or not these were actually sent to London. John Irwin, the famous scholar in textile study, is doubtful that the shipment of these Persian-style carpets made in Erol here were actually ever sent to London, because in 1686, the London-based directors of the English East India Company wrote to their factories in Persia stating that, quote, "Rich carpets are now grown much out of use in Europe," end quote. However, given the fact that the European traders established factory towns on Coromandel coast in areas where they could be linked to weaving centers and that they were active in the Indian textile trade, Persian-style carpets woven in the Deccan were probably a good substitute for the rich, that is to say, more expensive carpets woven in Persia. Indeed, in 1683, the English East India Company actually ordered 1,500 carpets from Coromandel in the Deccan. Moreover, when English and Dutch East India Company employees were also allowed to engage in private trade from the mid-17th century and mid-18th century respectively, high-quality Persian-style carpets from Elol would probably have been very attractive commodities for them to export. Dutch genre painting also depicts carpets which were most probably woven in the Deccan. Some late 17th century Dutch genre paintings depict star medallion carpets as table covers. It's a little bit difficult to see, but here the painter depicts a carpet with star medallion. In 1959, Brigitte Schoenemann made a diagram of the layout of the star medallion carpet based on its depiction in late 17th century Dutch genre paintings. When she wrote her article, no carpets with this design were known to exist, so she called them an unknown type of carpet. Only in 1986, after the discovery of Indian carpets in Kyoto, did it become clear that carpets of this unknown type matched the star medallion carpets owned by Kankoboko and Kita-Kannonyama of the Kyoto Gion Festival. Tokugawa Art Museum also has a carpet of the same type. As discussed by Nobuko Kajitani, Kojiro Yoshida, Daniel Walker, and recently myself, Deccani carpets of the 18th century were brought to Japan by the Dutch East India Company mainly as diplomatic gifts for the shogun, and then, over time, these carpets became more accessible to rich merchants, and that is how some of them became float covers for several festivals, such as the Kyoto Gion Festival. Coincidentally, many Dutch genre paintings, such as this one by Vermeer, depict small-sized carpets being used as table covers. This indicates the frequent use of imported carpets in daily settings. Given the above-mentioned carpet trade at the time, these depictions were probably of costly woven small-sized carpets produced in the Deccan, South India for export, such as this one in Kyoto. Probably these costly woven carpets from the Deccan were consumed as a commodity for daily use and therefore easily wore out. This could be one reason why no Deccani carpets are known to exist in the Netherlands today. Given the fact that the English and Dutch East India companies and private traders were actively trading in textiles made on the Coromandel coast into the 18th century, and that Deccani carpets in Kyoto were used mainly from the 18th century, Deccani carpets probably continued to be exported throughout the 18th century and later. Given such circumstances, it seems probable that this carpet in Shangri-La was woven in the Deccan in this 18th century. To conclude, in this paper, I have focused on 2 carpets and 2 textiles in Shangri-La and try to identify their provenance and the circumstances in which they were made and how they were brought to Europe, Japan, and eventually to Shangri-La. Regarding the shaped carpets and the tent panels, I agree with current attribution, but in the case of the embroidery and medallion carpet, I would suggest that their provenance lies in the 18th century Deccan. Doris Duke's choice of these carpets and textiles discussed in this paper deserves special note because they are not only beautiful and attractive as art objects, but also give us an insight into the long tradition of the production of high-quality textiles in India and their global distribution. Thank you very much.